First of all, I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you very much for coming and joining us in celebrating the career of our colleague, John T. Sharpnack. It is our purpose not to say goodbye today, but in fact to express our gratitude to Judge Sharpnack, to celebrate his personal attributes, and to remember our times together. Before I proceed, I want to introduce the members of my court and some of our distinguished guests. I'd ask that you withhold your acknowledgement until I've completed the list. All of you are distinguished guests. However, I will choose to recognize my colleagues and call upon my colleague from the Supreme Court to identify his colleagues, and I will identify some of our other guests as well. Joining me from the Court of Appeals is Judge Ezra H. Friedlander of Hamilton County, who serves as the presiding judge of the 2nd District, Judge Paul D. Mathias of Allen County, who serves as the presiding judge of the 3rd District, Judge Carl L. Darden of Marion County, the presiding judge of the 4th District, and Judge Nancy H. Vedic of Porter County, who is the acting presiding judge of the 5th District. On the row immediately in front of me and joining me today are my colleagues, Judge Edward W. Najum, Jr. from Monroe County, Judge Patricia A. Riley of Jasper County, Judge James S. Kirsch of Marion County, Judge L. Mark Bailey of Decatur County, Judge Melissa S. May of Vanderburgh County, Judge Michael P. Barnes of St. Joseph County, Judge Terry A. Crone of St. Joseph County, and our newest member, Judge Cale J. Bradford of Marion County. Please greet my colleagues. One of our colleagues, Judge Margaret G. Robb of Tippecanoe County, and her husband Stephen are unable to attend today as they are saying farewell to their son, Lieutenant Junior Grade Douglas Robb, who is about to be shipped out to the Persian Gulf on an extended tour with the United States Navy, but she sends her regards. We're also joined today by senior judges from our court, Judge George B. Hoffman and the Honorable Patrick D. Sullivan. We have also joining us today a lady who will soon be our newest colleague, the Honorable Elaine Brown of the Du Bois Superior Court, who's joined with her friend Steve Bradley. Welcome, Elaine. We also have with us today from the Indiana Tax Court, the Honorable Thomas G. Fisher, and in our judicial family, the wife of Justice Robert Rucker, Mrs. Denise D. Rucker. Please join me in welcoming these guests. Representing the other branches of government today, and if you would stand so we can all see you, we have with us, representing the Governor Mitch Daniels, his General Counsel, Mr. Mark Massa. Mr. Massa, thank you for being here. And representing the Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Virgil Madden. Mr. Madden, thank you for being here. There will be a number of occasions to say thank you to the next person I choose to introduce, but we will exercise that opportunity as well today for his numbers of years of service as our Attorney General, Mr. Steve Carter. Mr. Carter. From the legislative branch, we are joined by Representative Ralph Foley, a friend of the judiciary from down in the valley, Martinsville. Once again, I'll ask you to withhold your applause until I go through my list. Representing Indiana's judiciary, our trial bench, the Honorable Thomas J. Feltz of the Allen Circuit Court, who is the president of the Indiana Judges Association. Judge Phelps, thank you, sir. And the Honorable Stephen Hyman of the Bartholomew Circuit Court and his wife, Ann. Thank you for joining us. Our federal cousins from the United States District Court for the Southern District of Indiana, Judge Larry McKinney and Magistrate Judge Jane Magnus Stinson. Thank you all for being here as well. We are also joined today with members of our court family, the Clerk of the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals and the Tax Court, Mr. Kevin Smith, and his deputy, Ms. Heather Smith, and our own court administrator, Mr. Stephen Lancaster, and his deputy, Mrs. Danielle Schuff, and her husband, Andrew. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. We welcome you as well. From the practicing bar and those who serve the courts in the bar, we are joined today by Mr. Don Lundberg, Executive Director of the Disciplinary Commission, Ms. Lilia Judson, State Court Administrator, Ms. Jane Siegel, Executive Director of the Indiana Judicial Center, Ms. Meg Babcock, Counsel for the Judicial Nominating Commission and Qualification Commission, Ms. Julia Orzeski, Executive Director of the Indiana Commission on Continuing Legal Education. Thank you all for being here today as well. From the organized bar, we are joined today by Mr. Bill Jonas, President-elect of the Indiana State Bar Association, and Mr. Rod Morgan, Vice President of the Indiana State Bar Association, Mr. Richard Enan, immediate past President of the State Bar, and Mr. Tom Pierce, Executive Director of our State Bar, and Ms. Susan Jacobs of the State Bar's office. Thank you for joining us. We are also joined by Mr. Tom Ben-Kamaki, Director of the Indiana Continuing Education. From the Indiana Trial Lawyers Association, we have Ms. Michelle B. Wilson and Ms. Terry Todd. From the Defense Trial Council of Indiana, we have the President, Mr. Jeff McKean, and the Vice President, Mr. Thomas Schultz. Thank you all for joining us as well. We have a number of distinguished lawyers who have served as presidents of the Indiana Defense Lawyers Association, now known as the Defense Trial Council of Indiana, the Indiana Trial Lawyers Association, and various other and sundry groups, but all of whom come to celebrate John's accomplishments and service. I'm pleased to acknowledge Mr. Gary Clendenning and his wife Carol from Bloomington, Mr. and Mrs. Maurice Pat David. Is Pat here? There he is, bless your heart. Mr. Pat Harrison. Mr. Harrison? Mr. Peter King. Mr. King? Mr. Jeff Lockwood. Mr. Lee McTurnan. Mr. Lloyd Milliken. Mr. Roger Pardick. Mr. Tim Varna. Mr. Jim Voiles. And Mr. Robert Wagner. From academia, we are joined today by Professor William Harvey and his wife Jerry. Please join me in acknowledging all of our distinguished guests. My privilege now is to introduce to you a person who's had an awful lot to say about the Indiana Court of Appeals in the last few years. He has served as the chairman of the Judicial Nominating Commission when every member of the Indiana Court of Appeals was selected. He has served our Supreme Court since 1985 and as our Chief Justice since 1987. I am honored to introduce my friend, our friend, the Chief Justice of the United States, Randall T. Shepard.
Let's hope.
John Roberts is not going to let me forget that. That is reversible error.
Yeah. I wondered whether this was the part where it gets rowdy. Was that in the... Well, thank you, Your Honor. My colleagues are likewise gathered here today to to recognize the contribution of John Sharpnack, my colleagues Brent Dixon, Ted Boehm, and Robert Rucker. Justice Sullivan is out of the city today, but I'm authorized to speak on his behalf, as I am about 65% of the time. So count on some reliability. I'd like to reflect on the broad purpose of our observance today. It is, of course, first and foremost, a day when we take the occasion to say thank you and well done to John Sharpnack. But it's also a day which we hope reminds the community at large and reminds us ourselves about the great importance of this experiment in self-government that lawyers and judges and so many others are a part of. It is an exercise in hunting for truth and doing substantial justice, and a day in which we speak specially of the role that judges have, the special obligation judges have to be among society's guardians for the cause of justice. We speak especially about this judge and about judges generally. About 3 centuries or a little more than that ago, Lord Bacon said that judges should be more learned than witty, more revered than plausible, and more advised than self-confident. We, all of us, have learned a great deal about how to do that by watching the model that John Sharpnack has provided for us, both as a lawyer and as a judge. I would add to what Lord Bacon said, that one can measure a community by the kinds of people whom it lifts up to positions of responsibility and leadership. Measure a city by whom it chooses for mayor, a church by whom it chooses for pastor, a state by whom it lifts up as governor or attorney general or judge. And by that measure, John Sharpnack has given Indiana a splendid reputation. Thanks so much for what you've done for our state and for us as individuals. We're very grateful to you. Thank you, John.
It is my privilege to call upon the General Counsel for the Governor of the State of Indiana, Mitch Daniels, Mr. Mark S. Massa, for presentation and remarks. Mr. Massa.
Thank you, Judge, and may it please the Court. It is my high honor and privilege to be here today on behalf of Governor Mitch Daniels to bestow the traditional gubernatorial blessing, if you will, on the occasion, with the most deserved awarding of a Sagamore of the Wabash to the Honorable John Sharpnack of Columbus, Indiana. The Sagamore, as you all know, is the highest ceremonial honor that governors of Indiana have given to distinguished citizens since the 1940s. Before getting to that, however, I would like to ask everyone, particularly the lawyers and judges in the room today who knew him to keep in your hearts the memory of the late Jack Barney, who passed away this morning after a long bout with cancer. He was one of the finest men to ever serve on the Marion Superior Court. I had the privilege to practice before him as a young deputy prosecutor, and I'm also reminded today of my good fortune of having been seated next to him in this courtroom just over 8 months ago for the investiture of Cale Bradford, who proved to be a worthy successor to Judge Barney in Criminal Court 3. Jack was also a longtime friend of Judge Pat Sullivan, who reversed him on occasion, causing Jack to make a careful record thereafter in all his close calls. He would preface his rulings from the bench by saying, "For the benefit of those on the other end of Market Street who might be reading this sometime in the future." So we are gathered, of course, today to honor one of the very best at this end of Market Street, Judge John Sharpnack, for his years of service to the people of Indiana. Governor Daniels speaks often of the need for all of us to raise our sights, to aim higher, in his words. And today's gathering affords us the opportunity to celebrate the career of a man who has always aimed higher, who has always given more than he had to the legal profession, to his clients, to his colleagues, and who, by everyone's account, has always done so with grace and a gentle manner that sets an example of civility for the bench and bar alike. Indeed, by everyone's account, most recently, and I hope the judge doesn't mind me sharing this story, but no more than 15 minutes ago, I was chatting with a lifetime tenured federal judge who said to me, "You know, I love this guy. When I was a brand new lawyer in Edinburgh, Indiana, and he was a big-time lawyer in Columbus, Indiana, he treated me like I was a big-time lawyer from Columbus, Indiana." And as anyone who's ever been in front of Judge Larry McKinney can attest, that has certainly rubbed off on him as well. So let me also just note that Judge Sharpnack served his country in the United States Army between college and law school, and again thereafter when he was admitted into the prestigious honors program at the United States Department of Justice. He returned to Indiana and built a reputation as one of the finest lawyers in the state. For 6 years, he helped write the rules of trial practice that he subsequently enforced, and for 5 years, he served on the Ethics Committee of the State Bar. Who better to play such a role safeguarding the integrity of the profession? And for 17 years, he has brought a lifetime of experience, wisdom, and judgment to the Court of Appeals with a perspective that can only be gained by dealing with paying clients and their real-world challenges. Reviewing his career as a practitioner before Governor Bayh appointed him to the court, I'm reminded of something I once heard Chief Justice Shepard say in a State of the Judiciary address to the General Assembly years ago. Chief Justice was, as I recall, seeking better pay and benefits for judges, and he made the case that it was needed to attract men and women of the highest quality to the bench, people of some age, experience, and seasoning. He summarized his argument, as he usually does, with succinct eloquence, saying, when Hoosiers look up at the judge, they should look up to the judge. And I think it's fair to say that the Chief Justice had someone like John Sharpnack in mind when he uttered those words in the House chamber, and they merit repeating today. Judge, you've truly been a judge to look up to, someone who was more than ready on day one, and who reflected favorably on the governor who appointed him for every day thereafter that he served. So, Judge, let me now, on behalf of Governor Daniels, award to you the Sagamore the Wabash, and close by reading a portion of the boilerplate that is so appropriate to the occasion, wherein it notes that John Sharpnack has, quote, endeared himself to the citizens of Indiana, distinguished by his humanity in living, his loyalty and friendship, his wisdom in counsel, and his inspiration in leadership. Signed, Mitchell E. Daniels, Jr., Governor of the State of Indiana. Congratulations, Judge, and good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Massa. It's my privilege to call upon a representative from the Indiana State Bar Association, its president-elect, Mr. Bill Jonas from South Bend. Mr. Mr. Jonas.
May it please the court. On behalf of the State Bar President Doug Church and the 12,300 members of the Indiana State Bar Association, it is my distinct pleasure to be here today to honor Judge Sharpnack. Judge Sharpnack has been a member of and a friend to the Indiana State Bar Association for more than 44 years. He has served on numerous committees of the association. He held the position of chair of the Indiana State Bar Association House of Delegates in 1986 and 1987. Judge Sharpnack presided over the House meeting where the new Chief Justice of Indiana, Randall T. Shepard, made his first address to that body on April 9th, 1987. The issues of the day were discussions about judicial pay increases, tax on legal services, and the formation of a committee to discuss an alternative dispute resolution program for Indiana. If you're a baseball player, we're in the Hall of Fame because that's 333 that we've gotten taken care of there. Judge Sharpnack presided over 2 meetings of the House of Delegates in 1987. One lasted 1 hour and 5 minutes, and the other lasted 1 hour. He is indeed a master of efficiency. I remember thinking when Judge Sharpnack took the bench that he had the appearance and the bearing that was just absolutely perfect for an appellate judge. And I can tell you after seeing his performance on the bench that he didn't just have the look. Through his outstanding writing, his administrative excellence, and the demeanor with which he has treated the lawyers and the clients who have come before him, he has shown the best of what a judge should be. It is with great pride that we at the State Bar present you, Judge Sharpnack, with this numbered print of the Court of Appeals Chambers, initially produced in 1993 by Zionsville artist Barbara Geddes. Judge Sharpnack, as has long been promised, your print is #1 in the series.
Thank you, Bill. It's now my pleasure to call upon my friend from Fort Wayne, the representative of the Indiana Judiciary, the president of the Indiana Judges Association, Judge Thomas Phelps.
It's also an honor for me to be here today to represent the 400 plus judges and magistrates around the state, members of the Judges Association. We are your colleagues, we are your co-workers, more importantly, I think we're your friends. I have a memory box for you today, something to hold all the cards and letters I'm sure you've already received and will be receiving, all the good wishes from all your friends and colleagues in the judiciary. Thank goodness for the Senior Judge Program, Chief. We can keep Judge Sharpnack around for a little longer. And again, it's our pleasure to present this to you, and thank you, Judge Sharpnack.
Thank you.
I now have the privilege of calling upon a gentleman who has practiced before me and whom I practiced with for a number of years, and a man for whom I have a great deal of respect, who has also had the privilege of practicing before John Sharpnack and with John Sharpnack. I call upon his friend, Roger Pardick of Seymour, Indiana. Mr. Pardick, thank you for being here.
And Judge Baker, Chief Justice Shepard, distinguished members of the judiciary, it is an honor for me to participate in this ceremony. I come from the perspective of having known John as a friend and a colleague and a practicing lawyer for over 40 years. We practiced in the days when you could work both sides of the fence. He did predominantly defense work, but he did some really good plaintiff's work. I did some defense work, mainly plaintiff's work. And we had some wonderful experiences working against each other at a time when you might ride back and forth to a deposition together when you're on the other side of the fence, but also practicing together. I thought back over our experiences, and you may not know, because John's been a Court of Appeals judge for 17 years and a distinguished judge, he was an excellent trial lawyer. I tried a case against him, unfortunately, in Bloomington, and it came to mind because he did such a wonderful job in cross-examining my clients. This was a case where a man was killed 450 feet underground as they were digging a cavern, and the suit was brought against the landowner contractee by the employee of an independent contractor. And I represented, of course, the estate, the widow, her 4 little children. And then I learned, as a result of John's digging and investigation, that I also represented 3 other children. The employee had a mistress and 3 children, and they were all determined to be legally his. Presented a problem. We tried the case. The widow was on the stand. John cross-examined her and established that the decedent's interest in conceiving children was somewhat greater than his interest in caring for them after they were born. And after the widow testified, I called the mistress, and she testified, really did a very good job. And John stood up, greeted her with a very pleasant smile, and said, "Thank you, I have no questions." Absolutely the best cross-examination I've ever seen. And we had other cases. A lot of them were automobile cases and premises cases and construction cases. I think we represented the plaintiff in probably the largest fried chicken case ever in the state of Indiana. There was a poultry operation, confinement, where they had 40,000 hens producing eggs. It was a new operation. REMC had not yet been able to provide all the services to that facility. So they had this huge Cummins engine diesel generator set. We were called in because something happened with the gen set. It failed, started a fire. 40,000 chickens lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands of eggs were fried and scrambled and boiled. And we were out there, I think the day after the fire, enjoying this fragrant aroma, as you can imagine, trying to decide what to do with it. John had a wonderful idea initially, and that was we had a little tug of war with Cummins Engine Company over who was going to get the gen set. It had not been purchased. It had been leased, and not all the paperwork had been completed. So while we were getting that resolved, John suggested that we had a new associate. He'd been with us 5 days, and he should stay out there and guard this gen set. His next good idea was that we had to get this thing out of there so that our experts, our engineers, could evaluate it. I hadn't a clue on how we were going to do that, but he solved the problem by calling some people at Packer Engineering in Naperville, Illinois. They arranged for a huge truck and a crane to come down and wrap this whole thing up. This was before we had bubble wrap. They just simply packaged it all up, lifted it up on the truck, hauled it to Naperville, And thereafter, we investigated and investigated and investigated to find out just exactly why a connecting rod exited through the block of the engine and ignited the fire. That's a long story. Who is defense counsel? Stan Lawton.
Stan Lawton.
Stan Lawton.
Rocap. Jim
So
Rocap.
I was in fast company with John and Stan, and we were in Naperville one time. I was looking at this mass of what remained of the gen set and all the molten aluminum under it for at least the fourth or fifth time, seeing nothing new at all. And Cummins had their chief engineer up there. And John, although the chief engineer was for Cummins, John and the chief engineer became really fascinated with something down in this molten aluminum. And the engineer started picking it out and working with it, and lo and behold, he came up with the head of a connecting rod bolt. And he determined right there that the failure occurred because in the manufacturing process, a burr had remained under the connecting rod bolt. As the engine was used, the burr was mashed down. That created a tolerance that caused a bearing to fail. Thus, the rod exited, started a fire, and so forth. And we basically settled the case at that point, except for the dollar amount. I think that happened in part because Stan Lawton and Jim Rocap understood the honesty and the intellectual integrity of John Sharpnack. And they seemed comfortable in allowing him to meet and talk to their expert and their engineer. And when they found out what the problem was, they talked to him about it, and the case was over. And that is all by way of saying that John not only was an honest lawyer, he was a very skillful trial lawyer. And he could deal with widows and mistresses and molten aluminum with great aplomb. So it's been a wonderful experience for me, John, to have you as a friend and a colleague. Congratulations on your accomplishments. You certainly are a credit to the profession and have done a wonderful service for the state of Indiana.
Thank you, Roger. I hope we're not going to have fried chicken after this. Okay. It's my privilege to call upon my colleague, Judge Nancy H. Vadick, to make a few comments and observations. Judge Vadick.
It is my privilege and honor to talk about John's teaching career. But before I do that, I do have to revisit his career a bit as a lawyer. Mr. Pardick said a bit about what a great lawyer he was, but I think we forget that John's been on the bench for 17 years, and he ascended to the bench when he was 58 years old. And by that time, he had established himself as one heck of a good attorney. So much so that he was nominated and accepted into the American College of Trial Lawyers. That is a huge honor. When you look at the Supreme Court and you look at the Court of Appeals here, and you know, we've been in a courtroom a while, but none of us, save John, has been nominated and accepted to the American College. Because of that, and because of his reputation as a good trial lawyer, he was, like Tom Comica says, the go-to guy for trial advocacy teaching. And so for ICLEF, he taught trial advocacy, he taught about settlements, he taught how to be a lawyer. For the Judicial Center, he taught evidence and trial rules and the art and joy of holding people in contempt of court. And for NITA, he taught depositions and trial advocacy, and he's done that every year for God knows how many years. And I say no one knows how many years. I've called many, many people, and I've said, you know, how long did John Sharpnack teach for NETA? And each of them said, well, he was teaching when I started, and I started in... So it's been a long time. But so much so that in 2003, I bet you don't even know that there's 2 national faculty awards that NETA gives each year. And in 2003, John Sharpnack got one of those 2 awards called the Prentice Marshall Award, and he did it because of his service to NETA. So he's been teaching a long time. So I thought, you know, we're going to have a lot of great, funny teaching stories to talk about. So I called and sent messages to everybody that I know for NETA, and Sandy Brook responded, and he says, you know, Nancy, I remember one time that I was teaching with John, and one of the students came to me and said, or came to John and said, you know, I need to ask a question about closing argument. And John said, you know, I've done a couple closings, and I think. And Sandy said, you know, I was just floored at the humility of this man. And I said, Sandy, I said funny. This is not funny. So a former clerk of John's wrote, and he wrote, the judge was incredibly patient. I was often wrong, but never felt belittled. The force of the judge's intellect is such that he can make a point clearly, unequivocally, without making a tender, frightened law clerk feel like an idiot. He is a great judge, but also a great teacher. And I thought, okay, David, hilarious. So then I go to my ace in the hole, and I call Robert Wagner, who's been teaching with John for 22 years. And I said, Robert, you've got to come up with some funny story about John. And he said, I'll get back to you. And it was 24 hours later, and he calls me back, and he says, you know, Nancy, I've talked to everybody I know, I've talked to my wife, and I, quote, can't think of one damn funny story about John Sharpnack. So I'm thinking, you know, I am sunk. This is it. But then in my darkest hour of a dull testimonial haunting me, it came to me. And it was last week, and Barnes and Sharpnack and I were in a case conference. And we were sitting there, and Barnes and I were ranting and raving about the justice of a case and how we were going to do the right thing. And John sat there with that little smirk on his face, didn't say anything. He calmly, patiently waited until we were done with our ranting. And he said, after he paused a minute, you know, in our zeal for justice, sometimes we lose the law. And I thought, you know, that's quintessential Sharpnack. Here he is, he calmly, patiently listens. He's an unassuming man, and he listens to everyone, and then when it's all done, boom, here he comes out with these words of wisdom. And so I said, you know, John was the inspiration for a very famous fictional film character. And I thought about it, and I thought, gee, this character, you know, he's slight, and he has this endearing little grin on his face, and he's a balding man with kind of protruding ears. He's prone...
Where's this going?
He's prone to wear robes. He's the wise and all-powerful Zen master.
Oh, no.
By example, he showed young warriors how to battle effectively and ethically. He's taught his students how to use the Force for good and for evil. And then I thought, you know, of some of the critiques that I heard of John during the NETA seminars. Critiques like I've written them down here. Leading questions on cross-examination, you must. Tender expert witnesses, you shall not. Notes, use not. PowerPoint, sissies is for. Exhibits, jurors love. Cross, be not cross. And then it came to me, John Sharpnack is... Yes, John Sharpnack is the wise, all-powerful teacher teaching in his humble, unassuming way a generation of lawyers in Indiana. I do want to leave you with one Yoda-ism, and I think it's apropos for your retirement here, and that is, always in motion is the future. But, John, you need to know that our love and respect for you in time will be eternal. God bless, good luck, and we hope that you use your spare time to continue to teach us.
All of us have had the privilege of being surrounded by some outstanding young lawyers who serve the court as judicial law clerks, and John has been blessed by many. To speak as a representative of that group, I will call upon his senior judicial law clerk, Ms. Chris Arvin. Chris.
Thank you, Judge. I'm here today to talk about a man that you may have known in his younger years as Sharpie, a man that was described in his private practice years as the Velvet Stiletto, but a man that we know simply as the Judge. I have the honor of speaking on behalf of Judge Sharpnack's office administrator, Sherry Carr, and his 22 present and former clerks. Sherry and some of those clerks are here today. Could I ask you to stand? I feel privileged to have been a clerk for Judge Sharpnack for the past 6 years. As Judge Vedic discussed, Judge Sharpnack is an excellent teacher. I will always remember the judge's patience with my many questions. When I hit a roadblock while researching a case, I always knew that talking the issue through with the judge would help. He has a knack for clearing the fog and making a complex issue seem easier. On a personal note, the judge is a man of countless talents. He is an artist, a writer, a cook, a gardener, and a movie buff. He's a fan of classical music, the New York Times, Ocracoke Island on the Outer Banks, and Shapiro's. He is also a modest and private person, but you cannot meet the judge without learning how intelligent and caring he is. Through the years, the judge has demonstrated in many ways that he cared about us personally as well as professionally. He chatted with us each morning over coffee, took us to lunch on special occasions, and took us on yearly outings to the state fair to have lunch and see the animals. Ever the teacher, one year while looking at the world's largest boar, we had to laugh when we had to explain to a city boy summer intern that no, those are not tumors on that pig. We had weekly meetings on Friday mornings where the judge would bring in donuts and we would discuss our cases and the current events. The discussion of current events was just as important to our learning experience as the cases. We could always count on the judge to have an interesting topic, whether it was the latest movie or the migration pattern of some obscure bird. Occasionally, we would hear an interesting story about the judge's past. One of those stories demonstrates the judge's honesty and integrity, and I would like to share that with you today. Early in the judge's career, while he was working in Washington, D.C. for the Department of Justice, he had the day off work for George Washington's birthday. Not long after that, he received a letter from Robert F. Kennedy, who was the Attorney General at the time. That letter said, "Dear Mr. Sharpnack, I would like to thank you for coming to work on Wednesday, February 22nd, a national holiday. The spirit you demonstrated will, we hope, spread throughout the entire Department of Justice. Keep up the good work. Sincerely, Robert F. Kennedy." Well, like George Washington, who never told a lie, the judge promptly responded back and informed the Attorney General, in keeping with the spirit of Washington's birthday, I must confess that I did not work on that day. Mr. Kennedy wrote back, "Dear Mr. Sharpnack, with honesty like this in the department, the nation's cherry trees are safe." The story circulated around Washington and was printed in the Washington Post, some magazines, and 2 books on Robert Kennedy, all of which misspelled the judge's name. In preparing for the judge's retirement, we have been collecting stories and memories of our clerkships. Margie Lawyer Smith, who's seated in the back, took those thoughts and prepared a tribute that we gave to the judge last week at a surprise party. I'd like to read that tribute now. The tribute begins with a poem by W. Clement Stone that, we believe, describes Judge Sharpnack. Have the courage to say no. Have the courage to face the truth. Do the right thing because it is right. These are the magic keys to living your life with integrity. To Judge Sharpnack, with loving thanks from Sherry and your family of clerks for taking us to the state fair every year to eat lunch and see the world's largest pig, providing donuts every Friday while we discussed our cases and current events, encouraging us to contribute to the good of the order, introducing us to Shapiro's, playing your classical music for us while we worked, promoting a diversity of experiences and opinions among your clerks, celebrating our birthdays and special occasions with chamber lunches, tolerating the 70s beads hanging in our office doorways, performing marriage ceremonies for 3 of us, listening to our opinions, even when we disagreed, fostering a fun, comfortable work environment with your quick wit, sending Sherry to break up the battles over our drafts, having high expectations of us so that we now expect more of ourselves, approaching each case with a sense of fairness and respect, taking us by the hand and leading us by example, fearlessly standing your ground for what you knew was right, and living your life with immeasurable integrity each day in every relationship, in every case, in every decision. Judge, from Sherry and your clerks, we thank you and we wish you a long, wonderful retirement.
To also make observations from his colleagues, my colleague, Judge Michael P. Barnes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chief Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court, and my colleagues, and our honored guests, and all of you. I'm more than a little overwhelmed by the prospect of attempting to honor John Sharpnack by relating to all of you his impact on and the legacy he leaves by his 17-year plus tenure on our court. I believe that first and foremost, to truly understand what a gifted and talented judge he is, we acknowledge that before he came to our court, he was, as you've heard, recognized around our state as a lawyer's lawyer. While his legal and teaching career have been highlighted by Chris and Mr. Pardick and Judge Vedic, John's extensive trial experience was an asset when he came to our court, and clearly this was and is a skill set that helped him frame his decisions both legally and with the practical knowledge he gathered while doing real live lawyering. John Sharpnack is fond of saying that our function is to write and deliver opinions. It's what we do, he says. What we do has been done by John Sharpnack and his staff in a way that leaves legal analyses and legacies that will endure long after all of us here are no longer in the arena of the law. Simply put, the work that John produced over his 17-year-plus career serves as a beacon in many areas in our state's law. Specific, special, and noteworthy cases are so numerous that it's impossible to mention them all. Suffice it to say that when one of us was able to cite a Sharpnack case in our own work, we were sure we were on the right track and that the bench, bar, and the individual litigants were the recipients of the fairest and most legally sound brand of justice available. All of us aspire to replicate John's level of scholarship, his insight, and his practical, common sense, problem-solving ability. No mention of Judge Sharpnack's career would be complete without emphasizing his contribution as our 9-year Chief Judge. For over half his tenure on the court, John had the sometimes unenviable task of herding cats, as he used to say. His steady hand and amiable disposition guided our court through some of its most interesting and challenging periods. During John's tenure, the caseload of the court rose dramatically to record levels. Our court radically changed the way it did business by rotating panels of judges and assigning the cases to those panels on a blind draw basis. 6 judges were appointed to the court in a span of a little over 2 years, and John was charged with guiding and assimilating those judges into a cohesive and collegial court. Through these and other seismic changes, John Sharpnack provided steady, firm leadership that not only served the court well, but also served the citizens of the state of Indiana in an exemplary fashion. I don't think any anecdote more truly represents the sort of leadership John Sharpnack exemplified than the occasion when John was drafted to testify in front of and I know Representative Foley's here, let me just say, a not too friendly legislative committee on less than 24 hours notice. The topic was one which was of utmost importance to our court, and many of us were convinced that our position was about to be defeated. Never fear. Judge John Sharpnack, in his calm, deliberate, yet firm fashion, explained our concerns and our positions, and the crisis was averted. It was a masterful display of leadership and advocacy. He was simply a superb Chief Judge, and we are all grateful to you for your service. I would not and could not miss this opportunity to take a few moments of personal speaker privilege. Judge Sharpnack was assigned to be my mentor when I was appointed to the Court of Appeals. Some said the most curious pairing since Felix and Oscar. I didn't dare ask, but I suspect as Chief Judge, he drew the short straw, and thus the difficult task of attempting to mold me into a passable judge on the Court of Appeals fell to him. Although the jury is still out as to whether or not he has been successful in his task, no one could have been a better role model. Generous with his time, always willing to answer a question, no matter how basic or inane, keenly perceptive in his legal analysis, and with a rapier-like wit that was not often drawn, but was always appreciated. John Sharpnack is the archetype for Judge Indiana Court of Appeals. Recently, our colleague Jim Kirsch used a very apt metaphor with regard to Judge Sharpnack. He said that, like in athletics, John Sharpnack is a true superstar. Not only does he himself have tremendous skill and ability, but he also makes those around him better by raising them to his level. All of us who have experienced the gift of having John Sharpnack as our colleague echo that sentiment. Good luck in your retirement, my friend. We wish you well and look forward to your senior judge. Thank you.
No gift could adequately express our appreciation for Judge Sharpnack's service to our court and to his state, but it has been our tradition of late, established under Judge Sharpnack's tenure as our Chief Judge, that we give to a departing member a chair. Mr. Bailiff, I believe it's down here. Is that correct? It's over here. Thank you. And the chair bears the seal of our court, and it's our hope that it is enjoyed in your leisure. Because of your penchant for reading, we hope that you have many hours of enjoyment in the near future. Henry Lauder said, "I can tell where the lamplighter was by the trail he left behind." Brother Barnes has just outlined a number of the lights turned on by our colleague. He was a member of the 5th District when our court grew from 12 members to 15. He led us in utilizing professional staff to make us more efficient. As mentioned in 1997, we undertook an experiment to allocate cases on a rotating basis and to rotate our panels every 4 months. In tribute to Judge Sharpnack, our court has now decided that experiment has worked, and it will be our court policy hereafter. He established committees. It was John's belief that collegiality was shared responsibility and shared authority. One of the traditions that happened during John's tenure was the delivery of the fire hydrant. It is the tradition in our court that upon being selected the Chief Judge, there is delivered to that person's office, painted in his alma mater's colors, a fire hydrant. Apparently, a number of years ago, a federal judge, when asked what it is like to be a Chief Judge, said, "Being a Chief Judge is like being a fire hydrant to a pack of dogs. You attract a lot of attention. It's not all good." The original fire hydrant was painted black and red for the University of Cincinnati, and that tradition will always remind us of John's service to our court. John has always been conscious of the public he serves, the other branches of government, the bench, the trial bench, and the practicing bar. It is said that it is not what a man has, nor even what he does, which directly expresses the worth of a man, but what he is. As we have come to hear today, John Sharpnack is the epitome of integrity, intellect, persistence, patience, wisdom. Blessed are those that give without remembering and take without forgetting. You take with you our respect, our gratitude, and our desire to emulate your celebrated attributes. You gave your intellect, passion for justice, sense of shared responsibility and integrity. For that will, I believe, be your continuing legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, I present the Honorable John T. Sharpnack.
Well, all that hyperbole notwithstanding, I am still alive. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for the singular opportunity that I've had to serve, to labor in the vineyard of the law, to nourish and harvest from vines whose roots reach back through our history, to the English common law, through the Judeo-Christian teachings, to Roman law, and to the philosophers of Greece. Better get that, Nora Lou. Aren't sisters wonderful? It's a wonderful job, and perhaps the best that a lawyer can have. I've got a lot of thanking to do, but before I do that, I want to introduce the family. And we have a strong contingent from Canada. Helen and I have nieces and grandnieces and nephews in Canada, children and descendants of Helen's beloved sister Rose and her husband George, who were dear, dear friends of ours as well as relatives. Michael, I'm going to ask them to stand and to please remain standing till I've named them all, and then we'll show them our appreciation. Michael Palamides and Laura Plant, David and Adriana Palamides, Julie and Christian Catenacci, Deirdre Palamides, Colleen Marshall, and Kevin Marshall. And I have more family to go. My first cousin, longtime friend, longtime partner in the practice of law, Tom Bigley Jr., and his dear friend wife, Lynn. My sister, Nora Lou North, and her husband, Bob. Our daughter could not be here, unfortunately. Our son, Christopher. And last, but first, my dear, dear wife, Helen, who I won't start to say more about because I wouldn't be able to finish it. Thank you. The family. I owe, of course, thanks to the nominating commission some 17 years ago that sent my name forward to the governor. I thank Governor Bai for selecting me, and I thank the people of Indiana for twice retaining me in 1994 and in 2004. But most of all, I thank the people of Indiana for having the good sense and vision to amend the Constitution in 1970 to provide for the appointment and retention of Supreme Court justices and Court of Appeals judges under the current process. The high quality of the Court of Appeals today is, I believe, deeply a direct result of this selection process. We have only to look to some of our sister states to see what partisan election can bring in terms of campaigns costing millions and the specter of influence through investment in judicial candidates. I hope and trust the people of Indiana will maintain the process as it is, the one they chose so wisely, and will resist efforts to fix what is not broken. The backbone of a court is the administrative staff who keep the paper moving, get people paid, process the many orders, provide legal service to the motions panel and the court generally, provide security, provide clerk service to the senior judges, respond to inquiries of lawyers and others, and perform many, many, many other tasks that enhance the performance and efficiency of the court. I thank them for all that they have done during my time here, and I know they will carry on with that very good work. I particularly want to thank Steve Lancaster, our court administrator. I worked closely with Steve during the time that I was chief, and his insights and wise counsel were of great value to me, as they have been to the whole court. I know, as do we all, that he has made great contributions to the success of the court. I would like all of the staff and the bailiffs to stand, and Steve to stand, so that we may show our appreciation to them. Please stand. As the court has an administrator, a chamber has an administrative assistant. I've been lucky enough to have had Sherry Carr as my administrative assistant. Sherry was my secretary in private practice, and when I was promoted to judge, she came with me and was promoted to administrative assistant. Sherry has a sensible, practical, and intelligent way of looking at things. I think this is the first time I have admitted it, but I have found her advice very helpful at times. I cannot thank her enough for her years of service. Sherry, would you please stand so we can show you our appreciation? No Court of Appeals can meet the caseload challenges of today without the service of excellent clerks. They are the multipliers of the work of judges. They are also valuable intellectual companions whose help in analysis and composition is priceless. I value the time I have spent working with my clerks over the years. I have gotten very much from them, and I hope they've gotten something from me. You've already met my crew and the clerks who have served for me, but I'm going to ask them all to stand again, as well as every clerk in the room, whatever court you're from. Would you all please stand? All clerks. When many people hear the word collegiality, they tend to think of it as meaning the same thing as congeniality. But if you look in the dictionary, you will find that collegiality is defined as the sharing of authority among colleagues. And that definition of collegiality is the heart and soul of a court of appeals, of this Court of Appeals. We do not choose our colleagues as law firms do. Our colleagues are chosen by others. Our colleagues are of different ages and generations, different genders, different colors, different ancestry, different life experiences, different in so many ways. We share our collegial task of deciding appeals and explaining why we decide a case as we do. No one of us can do that. We act as a panel that changes from time to time. At least two of us must agree before resolution comes. We each impact upon the others and are impacted by them. I have had the good fortune to be a member of the court for a bit more than 17 years. In that time, I have worked on cases with 28 colleagues. Each of them has changed me in some way, and I'm going to assume that I've changed them in some way. It is that ongoing process of thought, discussion, response, consideration that makes a court what it is. And this is a good court. It does good work and it does it efficiently. I thank each and every colleague, now and past, for sharing your authority with me and giving life to the word collegiality. I'm asking my colleagues to stand now so that we may show our appreciation to them. Please stand. I have a word or two for Judge Brown. Don't get caught up in this notion of filling shoes and being a successor and all of that. You're not my successor. You are the newest member of the Court of Appeals, and you will have your own wonderful career and make your own contributions to the life of the court. As for the shoes, I'm going to keep them on when I leave. And remember, you will have only so much power and authority as your colleagues are willing to share with you of theirs. I wish you well, and I know you're going to love it. To wrap up here, I got to say that I feel a little bit like the kid who has just finished a great ride on a roller coaster. And as the coaster comes into the platform and slows down, he turns to his dad and he says, "Wow-wee, was that ever great. Can we do it again? Let's go again. Let's go again." Dad says, No, we got to go. He goes, "Oh, gee, please, Dad, can't we do one more? Just one more. How about now? One more." He says, "No, we got to go. There's other rides." And so, as a good little boy, I'm going to get out of the coaster and I'm going to go to the next ride. I hope it's going to be fun. And I think it will be. Thank all of you for coming, and thank you for the wonderful things you've said, even though they probably aren't all true. Thank you.
There is another ride, and that is that John is going to continue to serve our court as a senior judge. We will continue to have the blessing of his wisdom, his thoughtfulness, his insight, and his sense of humor. We would like to have an opportunity to visit more with you and to continue our celebration of John's wonderful career. And we ask that you join us in the atrium outside of the courtroom for refreshments so that we can visit and continue to celebrate. This concludes the formal portion of our program. We look forward to visiting with you, and thank you very much for your presence and your comments. Mr. Bailiff?